So again, if you are here today, you're here for an exciting talk on the state of African immigrants in New York. And I want to briefly introduce the panelists. And I also want to say a few words about why we're having this talk here at John Jay today. So first, let me start by introducing the panelists. And I'll make a couple of quick announcements. Again, those of you who need to leave around 2:50 for class, feel free to take your leave around 2:45. That's fine, we won't be offended. But we will have a brief Q&A at the end, so please feel free to hang around and offer any questions you might have about the presentation. Sammy Disu is a digital media journalist and communications specialist who is originally from Ghana. He has previously worked with Sahara Reporters Media Group, where he was a news writer and social media director, and has also served as the communications manager for the Black Institute, which is a nonprofit that advocates for people of color in the areas of immigration and economic justice. More recently, Sammy has started a communications consultancy and led communications operations for the United People for African Congress, which is a political action group which co-organized a historic gathering of Africans and leaders to the White House for a policy briefing this past February in 2016. Dr. Flatteau, to my immediate left, senior fellow and co-founder of the Du Bois Bunch Center. Dr. Flatteau is a professor of public administration. He received his PhD in American politics and public policy from City University of New York Graduate Center. Dr. Flatteau was chief of staff to Mayor David Dinkins, some of you may know, senior vice president of the New York State Urban Development Corporation, dean of the business school, dean of institutional advancement at Medgar Evers. He also served as commissioner for the New York City Districting Commission, as advisor to the New York State Legislative Advisory Task Force on Demographics and Reappointment, chairperson to the U.S. Census for Advisory Committee on African American Populations, and actually his list is quite extensive, so I won't read all of his accomplishments, but we can make his bio available for you online so you can get a sense of his litany of accomplishments. Why is this an important discussion to have here at John Jay College today? The state of African immigrants is largely, I think, unknown to our population and to the larger population of New York City. As you all may know, John Jay College is home to a very diverse student body. You yourselves are very reflective of that diversity. And yet, some of our colleagues that come from the continent, we call them continental Africans, continue to face lack of access to services, right? Whether that's education, like you all have the privilege of receiving here, lack of good access to health care, lack of representation in our local and state governments. Okay, and these are issues that affect us, the larger New York City community, but particularly they affect the development of these particular communities. The one thing I'd like for you all to keep in mind as you listen to this talk is that people from the African diaspora hail from 54 distinct countries, all with different cultures, different backgrounds, different experiences. So as you hear the discussion that we have today, I want you to kind of keep that in focus and think about how these different groups of African immigrants, new immigrants, some like yourselves, have experienced challenges growing up in this city, and what we can do to see about some change. Okay? Beginning, we'll have Sammy Disu start. He'll briefly discuss the state of African immigrants in New York, give you a sense of the extent to which they are underrepresented in state and local governments, and the lack of access that they continue to experience.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming to join us. Thank you, Professor Wheatland, for the introduction. My name is Sammy Disu, and I'm from Ghana. And I'd like us to begin this session in a way that we would have done back home in Ghana. Does anybody have an idea how, maybe I should say, Africans begin certain ceremonies or special functions? Yes, so that's the basic concept, acknowledgement, or some sort of a greeting, or just giving respect, especially to elders that may be in the gathering. This is very important for us to do. It could also be acknowledgement of the occasion itself, and that's what I'm going to do is recognizing that it's still Black History Month. Today is February 29th, so we're almost outside of Black History Month as we celebrate it. It's almost over, but I just want to mention that as an African, I'm very pleased that this event that we're doing today actually coincided with Black History Month. It's a very special occasion for most Africans, and it's simply because Africans have actually built this country. Centuries and centuries ago, Africans were brought here forcibly, and they've persevered, held themselves high in dignity, and in the course of all of their struggles, they've still laid the foundations for what is now the greatest nation on earth, and I do believe that. So I do want to just piggyback on what Professor Wheatland mentioned about some of my activities last week. I do handle communications for a political action group called United People for African Congress. And yes, we were at the White House along with representatives from all across the country, African representatives and friends. And we had a policy briefing with the president's team. We didn't get to see President Obama ourselves, but it was wonderful there to receive all of that information. And we also submitted a proclamation from the group that detailed what I would call the African agenda as we have gathered it in the last couple of weeks. And I just want to read the first paragraph of that proclamation. It was this particular paragraph was inserted by the president of UPAC. His name's Dr. Sylvester Okere, and he felt it was really necessary to celebrate the fact that we were gathering at the White House during Black History Month. And it goes, whereas our fast-growing and vibrant African community in the United States takes enormous pride in convening a historic gathering of African diaspora representatives at the White House during Black History Month, a month to bear witness to the persevering experiences of long-ago stolen African youth, enduring through generations of looted labor and life to lay the foundations of the greatest nation on earth. I completely agree with the doctor that it's something that we Africans need to do more, which is to let our African brothers that have been here in this country for ages, that we really are proud of what they've accomplished. And indeed, Black History Month is something that should be celebrated every day in this country. As you know very well, reparations is something that was promised to the freed slaves and never actually delivered upon. So America has a duty, really, to honor blacks for as long as this country exists. So let's begin with today's talk, political disenfranchisement and economic marginalization. This is, before I start, let me just make a distinction as to the Africans that I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be talking about recent African immigrants, okay? So we're talking about Africans that came willingly or were made to, or had to leave their homes and came and settled in America sometime in the last couple of decades, from the 1970s. Okay, so that's who I'm talking about today. And I think it's very fair to say the African community here in New York City, or at least in the state, has been around for some time. We're very visible, and we've invested in American life and our businesses. So we're all around here. A place like Little Senegal in Harlem, there are thousands and thousands of Senegalese. There are indeed other nationalities of Africans also in that part of Harlem. You talk about Little Liberia in Staten Island, there's over 30,000 strong Liberian population over there. It is growing. Most of them came during the 90s, the Civil War that ravaged Liberia for so long. And indeed, it's still felt in Liberia. In Bronx, which is thought to house the largest population of Africans in any city in the U.S., we have thousands and thousands of Ghanaians. I see and walk past them every day. In fact, routinely, I hear them before I even see them because I hear somebody behind me maybe speaking a language that I understand. I live in northern Bronx. So Africans are here and they've invested in being Americans. Yes, they always have their roots to Africa, and they have families that they have in Africa, and so they always have that. They always gear towards Africa as well, but they are Americans just the same. And the situation is that they are politically marginalized, and there's different ways to really see this and understand this. For example, if you just consider that in New York City, within the city council, we have 51 council members. Not one of them, that's a zero, are African born, okay? That gives you a sense that, you should just, if you've walked through certain parts of Bronx, it's hard to imagine that. How is it that we don't even have one city council member within some of the districts in Bronx that is African born? That's a symptom of political marginalization. If you look in the state assembly as well, you're not going to find one state assembly member that's African born. If you look at the Senate, state Senate, you're not going to see that as well. So all of this is really just different ways of understanding the extent to which the African population that's here and wants to be here is completely cut out from the centers of the power and decision making. So just keep that in mind as we proceed with my PowerPoint. If you'll get me a bit faster to, yes. So some things have contributed more than others to the situation in political underrepresentation for the African groups, okay? One of them is historical in that the U.S. immigration policy has favored European immigration, since really the creation of America in 1800s and also 1900s. You see this. There were quotas, actual quotas, and of how many Africans would be allowed from continental Africa into the U.S. Such quotas did not exist for most other immigrant groups, particularly the European groups. When you take a look at the Asian groups, initially they also had these kinds of quota systems placed on them. If you know a bit about American history, the Chinese came here in numbers, but really it was men during the early 1900s to help construct railroads and all kinds of infrastructure. The government never encouraged them or allowed them to bring women into the Chinese women into the country because the government was not interested in raising a Chinese population in this country. So similarly, Africans have been cut off for most of the existence of the U.S. in actually coming here and making America their home. It was really in 1970 when certain laws were passed to liberalize the ability of Africans to come into this country that we started seeing more and more numbers of Africans coming here. So we are now at about 1.8 million, and according to the U.S. Census, 2013 or so. And the African immigrant population is estimated to be about 4% of the entire foreign-born population in the U.S. This number could be so much higher had Africans been allowed to naturally immigrate here in the same ways that certain other immigrant groups were allowed to. So you can see that connection between actual government policy and the impacts it has had on our numbers at this time. Politically disenfranchised and economically marginalized. It's really not hard to understand this situation. If you are politically disenfranchised, it means your group is not able to have access to the people that are actually making decisions as to how government uses its resources and where it's using the resources and for what reasons or purposes. So you tend to be cut off from being able to operate in the country as well as other groups, other immigrant groups. And that's what's happened to the African immigrant group in general. It's been a system that's not allowed us to completely live freely and work freely in this country to uplift our communities, okay? Another way that you can see exactly these, how, to the extent to which political marginalization has impacted our community is just considering the fact that Africans are perhaps, and I would say, the most educated groups in America, whether you're comparing them to native-born populations or other recent immigrant groups. We all know that Nigerians, we've been hearing Nigerians do so well in school. They're exceeding all of the tests that you can imagine. It's not just Nigeria. It's all Africans, or Africans as a group. There are some countries that are doing better in this regard, but Africans as a group are the most educated class of immigrants. But at the same time, if you consider that the African immigrant group as a whole are more likely to be living beneath the federal poverty line, it should be telling you something, you know, because if you expect that if you have higher education, you can work in higher level employment, receiving higher wages, and thereby economically uplifting your communities as a whole. But this is not what we're seeing. Some of this is because the African immigrant community is, and I'm saying some of the reason why African immigrant community has such high educational attainment levels is that the immigration policy favors immigrants who have high educational levels. So even the diversity lottery, which is perhaps the most popular common way African immigrants have been coming into this country, even that requires at least a high school education. So you can see how this has caused a brain drain, if you will, from Africa into the US, but we're not really seeing it in the living circumstances of Africans, okay? Let's go on to the next. I'm just going to rush through this and finish up, but some of the things that need to change are relatively simple. Some of them go across all immigrant groups, but some of them some of the things that need to happen to empower African immigrant groups in this country need to be geared solely towards the African immigrant group. For example, there needs to be a comprehensive count of Africans in the coming 2020 census. In the 2010 census, the most recent one, Africans were not counted to the extent that they could have. The excuse that was given, or the reason, is that cost savings. In order to count every single person in the country, it's a very laborious kind of an effort. It's expensive, to be frank. But the U.S. Constitution actually requires this, because there's a lot that happens after the census. After you've been counted, what happens relatively quickly is redistricting of the entire country. So based on where there's emerging growth in the country, so the government needs to be able to see those patterns and be able to direct services, right? Or representation, whether it's on local or federal levels, changes based on where growth is happening and how many people are where. So if you do not know where Africans are, or in the numbers that they are, you're not going to be able to serve their population well. And they have their own specific need. So this is something that really needs to happen more comprehensively the next time round. The last time a more comprehensive census was done was in 2000, and about 28 African countries were actually counted specifically in the count. In 2010, that had reduced to about 18. And so this is something that the African immigrant community is going to be looking towards in the 2020 census. Then we need to be counted so that we know where we are, and so that government can better target resources where it's most needed. If it's not done in 2020, we're going to have to wait till 2030. That's just another 10 years of political marginalization. So this is right at the top of the agenda. Comprehensive immigration reform is something that needs to happen across this country. It will bring so many people out of the shadows. There's an estimated 11 million undocumented immigrants. These are people that are working under the table for the most part. Some of them are working legally, so to speak, and paying taxes. But if they're not able to be regularized with regards to their status in this country, they always face deportation, and there are all kinds of social problems that come with those kinds of situations.
So, Sammy, I'll have to stop you there. He's just about over time, but we'll come back to this issue of the policies that we propose or that are being proposed by certain community-based organizations to address this issue of lack of representation. At this time, we're going to transition to Dr. Flateau from Medgar Evers College, who'll give you a good sense of the U.S. 2020 census that's coming up, the importance of making sure that Africans are activated, the importance of making sure that we see some reforms that will allow for a full and fair count of the African population, as Sammy Disu just explained to us, that the issue with the past two census arrangements has been that Africans have not been counted effectively. So you can understand that if you are in a population of people who is not being properly counted, that in essence, that means that you're not getting the sort of access to services you need. You don't have access to, for example, language service. You speak French, or you speak Fulani, or you speak a language where services are not being provided to you, then that's going to create a number of issues for your communities, whether it's access to healthcare, whether it's teachers that want to come to PTA meetings but can't because they don't speak the language, whether it's an issue of decent work, having an employer exploit you and not being able to reach out and ask for a census because you fear that, one, you could be deported, or two, that you don't have recourse because possibly you're undocumented, or if you are, you just don't know what your rights are. So there are a myriad of issues that are faced by the African immigrant populations, and a source of those issues stems from them not being adequately counted and thus not having access to services and simply political representation. So we'll come back to those. Dr. Flateau, if you'd like to come up and begin your PowerPoint presentation.
Yes, thank you. That slide is already there. If you could just maybe put it up on the screen. And you do have copies of this presentation could you, Miriam, could you distribute these? They're on the table, but they're coming around. I'm going to speak from that, primarily from that one handout. And I would like to start off by, again, thanking Professor Wheatland and the Africana Studies Department here at John Jay College for convening this important event. Are there any Africana Studies majors in the room? I'm just curious. Okay, good, diversity. So I'm from Medgar Evers College, and we have a very strong African diasporan population at Medgar Evers College, and that informs some of the work that I've had the opportunity to do. And I would also like to acknowledge another participant in the room, if he could just sort of wave. That's Sadiq Y, who's the head of the, I just drew a blank. The United African Congress, which is also a diasporan organization representing a number of nations on the continent, representing the interests of continental Africans here in New York City. And we've had the pleasure of working on at least two censuses, two of the last two censuses, I believe. So with that being said, I want to call our attention, Sammy mentioned the census and the counts. So what you have that document that says overview, is the Census Bureau's most recent release of their count of the African populations, actually throughout the United States. That report has it, and I extracted it primarily, though, for just New York City. So the numbers you're looking at are Black ancestry populations from New York City. So according to the Census Bureau, at least self-identified, there are only 178,000 sub-Saharan Africans in New York City. We know what we mean when we say sub-Saharan, right? What does that mean? I'm a teacher. South of the Sahara, right? So this is not counting all of those nations that are commonly referred to as North Africa, okay? This is South. Anybody know what any of those countries would be in sub-Saharan Africa? We have one, Ghana, two, Sierra Leone. Where else? Congo, Guinea, Zaire, Nigeria, Zambia, Cote d'Ivoire, okay? So these are the countries we're talking about primarily, and the people from those countries. So when they broke down, they listed the countries for which they were able to get a count. And so they say that Nigeria has self-identified 22,000 people. You see that first line there? Say that their ancestry is Nigerian. 21,000 Ghana, 4,000 Ethiopia, 3,600 Senegal, 2,300 Liberia, 2,000 Sierra Leone, 1,000 the Sudan. But now look at that last number, other countries or other categories, and a lump sum sub-Saharan, in other words, people didn't say what country they were from, is over 100,000. So what, at least according to the Census Bureau's numbers, well, first of all, what do you think of those numbers? This is supposed to be in New York City, fairly recent, up until 2 years ago. That survey was actually taken on July 1, 2014, and it takes the Bureau about a year to package that information and then get a report out. So this data was released in June, just 8 or 9 months ago, and it's about 18 months old, at least the Bureau's homework. So what do you think of these numbers you're looking at, Mr. Ghana, Prime Minister of Ghana?
Have to ask me.
No, I am asking you. Is that accurate?
It's no, definitely not.
You, of course, okay.
Can't be,
So you
right?
think that's a huge underestimate or undercount?
I believe so. Yes.
Okay. Sierra Leone? Across the board. So we have a major problem because the official government agency then that is collecting the data, there's a disconnect between their research, their information, and common knowledge on the ground in New York City neighborhoods, communities, African communities. So that's a major challenge that we have to tackle. The good news is the 2020 census isn't for another 4 years. So we have 36 months to fix this problem, to get ourselves organized, to come up with some alternative recommendations to meet directly with this agency. The Census Bureau is a subdivision of the U.S. Department of Commerce, and they're charged with collecting this data. They have a national, regional, and local structure, and it'll be very important for us to be organized, representing these communities, and to sit down with these officials and have some serious conversation about how to connect the disconnect or repair this disconnect that exists. One of the very concrete steps that was mentioned was literally jobs, employment. There's two ways this data is being collected. There are either literally people on the ground going door to door and house to house collecting surveys, or we have been mailed a questionnaire, and that presents another set of challenges. For example, whose mailing list? Where did a list of names and addresses come from where these questionnaires are being sent? And then the questions themselves. Are the questions being asked in a way that we're going to get the information we should have? Who's writing those questions? I know nobody in this room had anything to do with writing those questions. So that's another big issue that needs to be tackled. And then, as Professor Dessou mentioned, okay, so I get a government questionnaire. I'm an immigrant. This is the government now sending me a big set of questions in the mail. Am I going to be prone to fill all that information out and send it back? Not necessarily. So there are major privacy, confidentiality, security issues that a lot of folks would have getting questionnaires from the government or having people knock on your door and want to ask you a lot of questions. So that means that there's a lot of education that needs to go on within our communities in places like this where we are right now, and the government itself needs to be educated. How many continental Africans are working in the Census Bureau now from these very countries that have the language facility or know the culture or know where our people are and can literally penetrate those neighborhoods, communities, individuals to get the information and assure people that if they do volunteer the information, that they're not going to literally be deported, okay? So that's a lot of work that government has to do and that we have to do. I want to put this subset, so now that we know that there's a huge undercount of the sub-Saharan African population right here in New York City, now we know we have 3 years to fix this issue, and the way to do it is to come together, get organized, speak with one voice, create our own consensus agenda about what needs to be fixed, and then we're under a timeline. We should also be aware, look at that second line there, that Africa or African means that we are a diaspora. All of the black people in New York City are not from continental Africa. Actually, ultimately, we are. But we got dropped off in different places in the transatlantic slave trade. Some of us were dropped off in the Caribbean, and then from the Caribbean moved to the continental United States. So there's another major community, the Afro-Caribbean community right here in New York City has some of the same challenges. And then African Americans that might have been here for hundreds of years even also have similar issues, okay, about being counted, being enfranchised or disenfranchised, whether or not we have a voice at the table where decisions are being made and government is taking on. By the way, the census is the largest civilian undertaking, government undertaking, that it ever undertakes. The decennial census is a once every 10-year exercise. And they literally hire a couple of million people. They have an address list of 140 million addresses, so obviously it takes time to do that. And they communicate. I can tell you right now that the Census Bureau is letting billions of dollars in contracts, okay, to hire companies and hire people. Who's doing the mailing? Okay, who's doing all that printing? IT. Here's another issue we have to wrap our arms around. There'll be increasing use of technology. Anybody in here a registered voter? Registered vote? So you know that if you were voting 5 years ago, the method of voting has changed, right? You no longer open a curtain, go in a booth, and flip mechanical levers. You now fill out an optical scan form sheet, right? Just like you're filling in a computerized test scores, you're filling in the dots, and then you stick that sheet in a scanner, in an optical scanner. So what's going to happen with this next census round, if you don't know how to operate a laptop or an iPad, you won't be able to get a job working for the census, most likely. So actually, I'm looking at the demographic in the room. You're in good shape. Think about folks, though, older than you who are technophobes, that means afraid of technology, not as computer literate as you are. They're going to be very challenged in terms of trying to get employed by the Bureau to go right back into these same communities, get hired. So training on these new technologies that are coming online becomes a major issue. And many of us will be able to fill out that census form the same way we tell Uber to come pick us up or pay our phone bill on our iPhone or Android. You're going to be able to fill out that census form using your smartphone. So if you don't own a smartphone, and if you're not that smart or comfortable with technology, that's a handicap for you being able to participate in the process. So we have a lot of work ahead of us to do. On the flip side, how much more time do I have, Professor? 5 minutes. So does everybody have one of these? Because I also want to, on one hand, we should have tunnel vision about this census issue and count, but since you brought up political disenfranchisement, there are a lot of other very important political activities going on that impact our communities that we just can't put our blinders on. Can anybody name one of them that's literally going on right now while we're sitting here? Political actor? Presidential 26. Y'all not watching the soaps? You're not watching the dramas? Every day there's some headline, right, about one of these presidential candidates talking about somebody's mama or how big their hands are, or what are some of the other slights? I keep picking up, they're all front page headlines in the Daily News, the Post, the Times. Presidential election 16. We want to make an impact. Who becomes the next president of the United States will preside, will pick the person who is the next Commerce Secretary, and they will pick the person who is running the Census Bureau, and they will be in office 1 term or 2 terms. When this process, all these issues that we want to get resolved, they're going to be in power and in control. So we need to be we need to be thinking about making our voices heard now while all these candidates are running around looking for everybody's support. Okay, they have us sliced and diced: the Asian vote, the black vote, the Hispanic vote, the white vote, the soccer mom vote. So if you fit in one of these, the students, right? Don't you? Finally, one of your big issues, it seems to be on the front burner, which is what? Tuition, college debt. Right? At least some of the candidates are talking about that. So we have a vested interest in coming up with an agenda and promoting that agenda now before these political candidates get into office. They're only going to remember, and they may barely remember, those who they think helped put them there, or those constituencies that made some noise about issues that they thought are important, such as enfranchising immigrant communities. More specifically, we're here to talk about African immigrants, but immigrants are colors of the rainbow. We're everybody. We're white. There are huge Irish immigrant populations in Queens, Woodside, Queens. Okay, there are huge Asian. The single largest actually immigrant population, I believe, in New York City, or number 2, is Chinese. Okay, so we need to reach across. Look at those numbers at the bottom. We need to coalesce. It's okay to form your own group and figure out what's important to you, but then we need to be talking across lines, racial lines, ethnic lines, cultural. We need multiracial, multi-ethnic, multicultural coalitions where we can come up with a common set of ideas. Because think about the people in power. If every other day some new group comes in that wants to meet with them and everybody's got 50 different ideas or issues and 99 problems, but yours ain't one. Who said that? Yeah, 99 problems, but yours ain't one. If we could boil that down to 5 or 10 problems, and we've got a coalition that we've all signed on to certain issues that we have in common, such as an accurate count of all persons in the next census, regardless of your immigration status. All workers need to be hired. Whether you're a permanent resident or a U.S. citizen, you should be on that payroll when those million people are going out to count the next round of who's in America. So I think I'm going to stop there, and because I'm hoping we'll have some serious, intense dialogue and discourse on some of these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Flateau. So before we revisit Sammy's conclusions as far as policy recommendations and next steps, I would just like to say I'm so honored to have some of our community leaders, our African community leaders. We honored Honorable Sadiq Wai from NYPD. Thank you so much for joining us.
And President of the United African Congress.
And President of the United African Congress, yes. He wears many hats. I encourage you students, if you have any questions or have further interest in this topic, these are the people you should be reaching out to. I want to also ask Mrs. Ramatu Ahmed to come to the front to speak for a few moments. She's another of our amazing prized leaders within the African community. Please come forward. I'd like her to speak a few minutes, really to add to the conversation about the state of African immigrants. She's someone who works in the trenches. She has experience working within the communities across coalitions. She's someone who we need to recognize who's a leader, but she's also a member of the community. She's not above us. She is walking with us, but yet she leads in all her capacities. Ms. Ramatu.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ramatu Ahmed, and I live in the Bronx. I wear many hats, but I always tell people that my love is for Africa, and especially the youth. Whatever we are doing today is just to build a foundation for the youth. We have met a lot of difficulties in our lives, and I can speak specifically for the Africans in the Bronx. We have a lot of issues from housing, from the education of our children, from even hospital accessing services for our people is a problem. Immigration is the biggest of all. And we've been fighting for so many years. Nobody can take the credit. Everybody is part of the struggle. But the most important now is the census that we are talking about. And I remember when there was a program in the Bronx, my friends here were part of it. I raised a concern about Africans being undercounted. And I was told that it is a congressional issue. That's what I was told by the current, our city controller. He met with the African community in the Bronx, and I mentioned that to him, that it's a very big issue affecting the Africans. Because if you don't know the number of the people, how can you fight for their rights? How can they get the access of services that they need? So you need to know the number of the people before you can fight for them. So I mentioned that, and when he mentioned to me that it is a congressional issue, I was so disappointed because I was expecting him to say that even though it is a congressional issue, I will help you to get your words out. So I was not encouraged, and I really felt bad about the politics that is going on in the country. It looks like people come to you, they use you, they dump you, they come back when they need your votes. And that is what is happening within the African community. At the same time, I would like to urge the African youth who are here, you have to come to the community. You have to understand what is happening in the community. You cannot run away from yourself. You are Africans, and that is your identity. So whatever we are doing at the community level, if we don't get you coming to help us, it is very difficult to move ahead. We have a lot of community activities happening in the community, but when we stretch our hands to invite the African youth, we don't really get the support that we need. And without you, nothing can happen. I don't know how to Twitter. I don't know how to do a lot of technological stuff. I always call my friends here and there, but you people know those stuff. And that is how we can get the voices be heard. African youth are everywhere across America. We went to the White House this past Monday. It was a young African Nigerian. He was able to put this together to get Africans to the White House to have a briefing, and it was successful. Now we are pushing for a petition over 100,000 petition. We are looking for people to sign this petition so that our African brothers and sisters from Sierra Leone, Senegal, and Liberia could stay longer here in America. We cannot do it by ourselves. We need everybody's support. We are all one, and we have to struggle together. Before I sit down, we are organizing the United States African Health Conference 2016 here in the United States. It is going, we have the call for abstract. There's a lot of things happening, but we want the youth, the African youth, to take over. I don't want to be running around in the next 2 years and talking for Africans. We want to see the young ones talking for themselves, talking for us. We want you to take the baton and run for office. We want you, to conduct researches on Africans because we don't have our own story. And we are complaining that we don't want anybody to tell us our stories. And we don't even know our stories. We don't know it. How many of us know what is happening on Africans in the Bronx? How many of us know what is happening to Africans in Seattle? We don't know. We don't even have a common connection among ourselves. Until we do this, we'll continue talking and talking, and the youth particularly, come forward to us, take initiative, and do something for the community. Thank you.
Ms. Ramatu Ahmed, thank you. So, as I said, in the last, let's say 5 minutes, we'll wrap up the presentation. Sammy will conclude with his remarks about the immigrant vote, a bill put forward by Councilmember Daniel Drum, and then we'd like to take some questions from you all. So those of you who can stay and ask questions, I hope you will. This video will be made available online, and we'll publicize that. But thank you for joining us. And so, Sammy, if you'd like to conclude with the immigrant vote.
Yes, so the immigrant vote had been advanced by Council Member Daniel Drum is something that's really exciting a lot of immigrants, because for the first time, if this passes, what it will do is allow anybody with a NYC ID at the minimum to vote in municipal level elections. This includes mayor, this includes comptroller, all the way down. So all of these politicians would have to be responsive to not just legal immigrants, but also those that are undocumented, but that can provide some sort of a government ID. I want to quickly recognize Mayor de Blasio for laying the groundwork with the NYC ID. He didn't create it with that in mind, but that's something that would prove beneficial and a game changer once this bill passes. And it looks pretty good, because so far there are 32 co-sponsors to the bill, 32 out of the 51 city council members. So that's already a safe, a veto-proof group right there for this vote. So keep an eye out for this immigrant vote. And of course, the continuation of the diversity lottery. This is very big for the African community in general, because this is a legal way through which Africans have been able to really boost their numbers in the U.S. So we need to keep this program going, because there are other government initiatives with regards to immigration policy, like the highly skilled visa process, but that's not something that Africans typically can make use of. So the diversity lottery is something that Africans should be keeping an eye on and make sure that continues, because it allows us to come into the country in a legal way. Thank you.
Thank you, Sammy. Dr. Flateau, would you like to offer some closing remarks before we open for questions?
Yes. Thank you again. So we already talked about the 2020 census, and we mentioned we're all aware of a presidential election, but there are actually 4 elections in New York City this year. The first is in April, and that is where delegates to the national political conventions will be elected by we the people. And then those delegates are going to pick their party nominees to run for president. April. In June, there is an election for only our congressional representatives. Speaking of that comment that was made, that the comptroller, by the way, I would respectfully disagree. The census is not just a congressional issue. It's everybody's issue. NGOs, government agencies, faith community, everybody needs to be involved in order for the census to. So don't let anyone ever tell you that that's someone else's agenda or job participating in the census. So in June, the congressional representatives are elected. In September, the state legislators are up for re-election, as well as political party leaders. I don't know if you've heard of state committee persons and district leaders, and judicial delegates. The judiciary's on the radar again too now, right? With the passing of Associate Supreme Court Justice Scalia, we should pay attention to the importance of the judicial branch. They're declaring legal and illegal former congressional districts. The chair of the Congressional Black Caucus just had his district in North Carolina declared unconstitutional by the federal court. They just wiped out the congressional district he's representing. So the judiciary and who picks the judicial nominees and who ratifies those picks, that's the argument going right and back and forth right now between President Obama and the United States Senate. They're all elected officials. So we need to pay attention. We need to get registered. We need to push citizenship drives in our communities, okay, because that's the first step to voter registration until we pass Senator Drom's bill. In that case, I would assume you're saying a New York City voter ID or permanent resident could vote in municipal elections. And finally, I would say that voter education is also a very important process so that we understand what's at stake. And the census as well. It determines two things. The allocation of resources to our communities is based on that count. Okay, how many people we have in our community who are below the poverty line, as was mentioned before, or need educational services, or can't afford health care, et cetera. So that count is used for resource allocation, and it's used to determine our political representation. How many members of Congress will we have, or how many state legislators will we have? And the redistricting is drawing those lines every 10 years when those census numbers are certified. All of the districts and politicians we're talking about get their lines or districts redrawn. And that process, who's got the pen on the paper, will determine which of our neighborhoods, our groups of people will have a voice in that process. We'll actually be able to elect candidates of our choice. And on that final note, I want to point out that Honorable Sadiq Y ran for citywide office. So that's the last point to make. Don't just study the process. We need to elevate people from our very communities to get involved in the process, run for office, help elect others to office who are going to represent our interests. And on that note, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Flateau. So are there any questions from the audience members? Sadiq, will you please come forward?
Okay, thank you. So I just want to start by thanking you, Prof, and as well as Sammy and my distinguished leader here, Dr. Flateau. You know, it is very, very important to note that the work that Sammy and Professor Whitehead and Dr. Flateau are doing is really a labor of love that many of us, including myself, sit on shoulders like him. It is important for history, because some of you are new. They said the only thing you know is what you know. What you're doing, many people have fought, have had scars, but what you're doing is also very, very important. Let me just recognize my colleague, perhaps one of Africa's leading journalists in this country, not only in New York, Mr. Milton Almandi, that publishes the Black Star News. He covers issues here and abroad. Let me go quickly to just some things to think about. Census. We fought during census time to have a designation for Africans. We wanted to be identified as Africans from the continent. That matter was voted down. Why? Because there was a political implication involved that if we do split that, the resources that would be given to just checking black will be undercut. So there was a political issue involved there. So just truly, our big brother said, well, let's do it, but we will have a designation the next time. That's 10 years later. Well, the only way these things are going to be fought, and let me be very clear, we could be as politically correct as we want to be. In this town, in this city, across this country, if you don't vote, you are not, there are people, many Africans today that could vote, but they're not registered. So voter registration and education is going to be an important part of this campaign. I ran for office, the second highest office in this city. My people did not even understand that I was running. They figured that once you're running for office, you got money. Yeah, public campaign finance, you have to have people to qualify you to be on the ballot. You got to give money. Our people don't give money. Our people don't even register. And the reason for that is many of them are not citizens. So that brings back to the coalition that he's talking about. Of all of my votes, my almost 14,000 votes, I guarantee you I'm not putting my family down. I didn't get 2,000 from Africans. It's not their fault. They didn't understand. Second, census. I just proposed to Dr. John Flatto, and I hope Prof. will consider this. The only way we're going to be able to count ourselves is for us to begin the process of counting ourselves. We can partner with John Jay, Medgar Evers College, because we need an academic component to this, and Sam Disu, they have done a very, very good report. Let us engage our community. We'll bring the Muslim leaders, we'll bring the clergy, we'll bring the women organization, we'll bring the youths, we'll bring CBOs. Let us do our own count. Everybody is counting us, and the figures are not correct. We may not get 100% count, but let us, this is a challenge now. I'm asking, and Dr. Flatto sits on that National Census Board, and I'm sure if there's a question of writing a proposal, that will create some jobs for our people. And that will give us, because the reason why the census count is not correct, because people don't trust the people doing the count. They don't speak our language. So if you go to our masjid, you speaking Yoruba, you speaking Akan, there are things that we could say to each other that we will get that confidence to make you sign that, as opposed to somebody who's come, because we raise a political issue when they said, okay, we send you the report, I mean, the things you fill out. So we raised the question, we said, wait a minute now. What if any of these people filling out this form becomes deported? Do we have a legal recourse? And we challenged them, we wanted legal protection. We didn't get it. So, I thank you for this opportunity, and Ramatu is being a fearless leader. And again, let me speak to the women. They're always saying African men dominate. The business of politics has nothing to do with that. We want to see our women, our sisters and daughters running for public office. The only way you're going to be in this game, you got to be in it. I will shut up and listen. I thank you all very much for that.
Questions? Professor Almati, please come forward. Any student questions? Any students want to offer questions? Professor Almati? Come forward, please. And then we'll wrap up in about 5 minutes.
All right, so the first question actually is for Sammy, but I think both of you might want to handle it too. Just looking at the population-wise of African immigrant population in New York City, in potential districts where they could be majorities, if they were all voting, being registered, how many city council members would you project would be African immigrant born? And then the second question is more to Professor Flatto. In terms of, in the past, was the Caribbean immigrant population also subjected to a severe undercount at one point? And how did that eventually transition and change and become a more accurate count? If you could talk briefly about that. And to Sister Ramatu, who spoke briefly, I think just the passion and the level of information that you have, I think you yourself should also step forward and run for the city council.
So you partially answered your first question.
So, politics is not clean cut. And you don't necessarily, as a group, have to have a majority in a certain district to actually win a council seat. Sometimes different groups work together, and actually there are unspoken agreements to pass turns, so to speak. It's a very difficult question to answer, but there are, at least in my mind, 3 districts in just Bronx where there are significant African populations, and it's amazing we haven't had an African born yet. Same thing with Staten Island. We have such huge populations clustered in certain areas where you should have a good chance of getting a Liberian born as a city council member in that place. So it's not something that I can give an exact number, but there is no reason why we haven't had an African born in a number of districts yet.
I would agree with Sammy's point also. I think that when you're seeking to win office, you do start with the concept of a base. You have to define for yourself what is my jumping off point, my launching pad. And a natural answer to that question is my own people, my community, assuming that you've been active in your community, you're known and respected in your community. That should be a natural base of support. But then you want to branch out beyond that. So you don't necessarily have to have a numerical majority. Then, if you're known by reputation as an honest, hardworking advocate for your constituencies, then that reputation will go far beyond, your immediate ethnic base, I would say. And Sadiq made that point when he broke down his own numbers. So there's hope there. His second point was the Nike slogan. There's nothing to it but to do it. You have to step out into the arena and create history, okay? And eventually there's going to be a breakthrough. And thinking in terms of coalitions and issues that more than one group can coalesce around is also broadens that base. There was a second question. You asked about the Caribbean American community. So my observation would be that they had a number of constituencies that pushed that same issue of the undercount. One elected officials. You see, elected officials are impacted when there's an undercount of their natural base in their community. That's a negative for them, okay? And that means that their natural base is not going to get its fair share of resources. So they were pushing that issue. Media, their own ethnic media, print, electronic, was pushing that issue. Faith institutions, nonprofit organizations, their small business community, and in fact, we did have a grant program at the state level and it's smaller at the Census Bureau itself that gave small amounts of resources, particularly to some of these nonprofit groups, to do the education, the educational work, because the Bureau itself wants to look good. They don't want the world to know that they missed 1/4 of the people. They're catching heck down in Washington from those congressional oversight committees that want to know, what are you doing with these billions of dollars? Do you really need billions? So if they come back to the table showing that they had a 10% or 15% or a 20% undercount, then they do not look like they were doing their job. So I think the Caribbean American community, therefore, was pretty sophisticated in pushing that whole range of buttons to help get their numbers up. Having said that, there's still more work to be done. They still have an undercount. All of our community, the entire African diasporan community has an undercount problem that we need to address. That's why it's good we're talking about this 3 years out. It'll give us more time to fix the problem in time, on time.
Thank you, Dr. Flateau. So in the interest of time, I know that we promised to conclude the panel at 10 till. I just want to make some very brief closing remarks and thanks to everyone who attended. It may not be necessary. I think the panelists and even the commentators did a wonderful job of really helping us to understand and summarize the issues faced by the African immigrant community at present. The challenge that lies ahead, we need an effective count, a count that is truly representative of our people. So we need to begin in that work, as we have said, of pressuring our leaders, of finding ways to ourselves build coalitions that are, as we have said, multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious. We need support of our communities and friends. This is not just an African issue, as we've said. It will require a broad-based coalition, one that will have to be with us until the end, because this will be an enduring issue. The stakes are too high. People talk about the upcoming 2016 presidential election as if it's life or death. I would say the same for the upcoming 2020 census for some of our groups. Again, if Africans do not get the kind of representation that is indicative of their populations, we will continue to have major issues with underrepresentation, lack of access to services, which is a challenge not just for the African community, but for all of New York State in the various communities. As we've said, Africans are among the most educated population of immigrants in this city, in this state. Therefore, it remains important that we find ways to uplift them and allow them to use their skills and education to improve the status of their communities and thus the status of New York State overall. Okay? And that's the same for all of our African and all of our Black diasporan communities, let me say Afro-Caribbean and others. So I hope that you all will stay tuned. We'll plan to have this series at least once more over the course of this semester. I hope you'll follow the conversation on Twitter via, I think it's _FIA_New York, if I'm not mistaken. We'd like to give some special thanks to the Black Institute. I understand that some of the facts that were presented here were taken from their report, Taxation Without Representation. Dr. Flateau and your work at Medgar Evers College has really laid the foundation for what we can do
And my
moving
research
forward.
assistant is here too, PA Major O'Meal Morgan.
Welcome. And so let's all work to do our part. Professor Alamati, I'm so glad you're here. I look forward to doing more collaborative work with you in this regard. And to our leaders, so important to our community, Mr. Y, Mrs. Ahmed, I hope that you will continue to be the incentive for us, be the inspiration for us to keep moving forward, because again, we don't have the option to not press ahead. Thanks again to all of you for attending, and we look forward to being in touch with you. Feel free to reach out to the panelists for their contact information. You'll be seeing them again soon, hopefully.
Thank you.